Okay, so Dan, when you're ready, let's get rolling with some questions.
Yesterday, you spoke to how Taoism is rooted in Buddhism. Would you be able to give any advice on how to take insights and practices of Qigong into Zazen? In other words, are there ways we might explicitly work with energy in Zazen in terms of energy centers, channels, and energy in and beyond the body? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Okay, so first of all, I just want to slightly clarify a point that I may not have been clear about. I'm not saying that Taoism is rooted in Buddhism or that Buddhism is rooted in Taoism. It's more that, because Buddhism definitely, evolved in India. And Taoism is, the ancient Chinese wisdom system from way, way back, first millennium BCE and maybe before. And Buddhism only started coming into China around the first millennium BCE or first century BCE or first century CE, around 2000 years ago, is my understanding. So Taoism was already there. So it's more a matter of how Buddhism in China did what it's done elsewhere in in Asia, and now I think we're seeing it in the West as well, which is that its core insights are quite translatable into um, pre-existing cultural conditions, so to speak. It's not like it's a really set system of practices and rites or something that, unless you take all of it, you're not really doing Buddhism, because the essential tenet. I don't know if this is a fair thing to say, but maybe something like the core meaning of Buddha, awakened, is what the system's named after. Now, it must be said that probably 90% of Buddhists aren't really practicing kind of for awakening the way we've taken it on in the West. But I think, nevertheless, the sort of, the core experience, if we can talk about it, of Buddhism seems to be about awakening from what we've taken ourselves to be, with associated changes in how we live. And so it seems that in that, what's the word? It found quite a comfortable, well, it could fit rather well with some Taoist views of how things arise. And so for example, Taoism, which I've got to say, I really don't know a whole lot about it, but seems to have some notion of wu, or as it's in Japanese, mu, meaning something like absence. And that being a core cosmological principle and fact. And that was quite easily, I guess, conflated, or, it was very congruent with the Buddhist view of emptiness, or shunyata, emptiness being the basic fact of which all this multiplicity of phenomena is made. So one point there. To the question of, how do we do Taoist style energy practice while doing Zazen? I mean, honestly, I think no is the simplest answer. That's not what's normally taught. I know I had a friend way back, a Chinese practitioner, who was studying under one of my teachers at the same time, and occasionally we were on retreat together. I'm just trying to remember. I think his name was actually Mu, and he used to do a lot of that. Tracking energy in the body, trying to move it, sensing where it wasn't moving freely and stuff. And but that was not that's not really, I think it's fair to say, that's not what we would normally think of as sort of, in a sense, what Zazen is for. I believe those kinds of practices can be immensely helpful, I'm sure. But Zazen time or meditation time in Zen is not about doing that. It's about just sitting as things are and letting go. Yeah, not hey. I mean, some people I know might start a sit with something like that. They might want to get some energy flowing around the body or something, and there are methods for that from Taoism and from other traditions, of course. And you might spend a few minutes. Some people might doing that, and then they settle down, and we drop all of that. That's a little bit could be very helpful preparatory for Zazen, but it's not really the core of what this sitting practice is about, which is sitting, right? I mean, as we're looking at Rosso, Luzu, how, sort of light as a feather, totally grounded at the same time, just sits. Yeah. Okay. Dan, maybe try another.
Zen's project seems to be a shift in perspective to see reality for what it already is. But even if our awareness of any shift in perspective or lack of shift is already reality, turning to face the wall seems beyond this or any other kind of reasoning and there could be no other way. Is my understanding flawed?
Wait a minute. Part of it seemed sort of, in a way, right on, but I didn't get Dan, sorry, could you repeat the bit about turning to face the wall? What was that line?
Sure. Turning to face the wall seems beyond this or any other kind of reasoning
Okay,
and
hold
could
on.
be
Let's just pause it there. Turning to face the wall seems beyond this or beyond any other kind of reasoning
and could be no other way.
and could be no other way. Yeah, I mean, turning to face the wall is nothing but turning to face the wall. So that's right. So, but I mean, let's just remember this point that this isn't a matter of reason. It's not a matter of understanding. It's a matter of experiencing. This whole Zen thing isn't about getting in the sense of understanding. It's not to be understood as we understand understanding in Zen, meaning that it's basically conceptual. This is, what is it like? What is it like when the mind of concepts, when all our reasoning, all our understanding isn't present? What is this then? And turning to face the wall for Rosso is exactly that. It's exactly this. So we're not, and by the way, it can be reasoning too. Nothing wrong with thoughts, actually. Yamada Koan, in some of his writings, said a number of times, thoughts aren't really the enemy. In a certain sense, as we're on the outward journey, they can be a hindrance. To get caught up in thoughts is one way of keeping the egoic, separate self strong. And to start to starve it of thought is a way to have it grow weaker. Although having it grow weaker is not the same as seeing through it, but it can help with getting to see through it. But thereafter, I mean, when we're really clear enough, basically, or when we're at times when we're clear enough, thoughts are simply not a problem at all. They're it too. This this great you know expressiveness of the fundamental goneness, emptiness, great expressiveness. It's showing up in all possible ways. So from that point of view, I don't know whether this was somewhere in the question, but from that point of view, in a certain sense, there's nothing, everything we could possibly sort of have, or be, or anything, is already here. There's nothing else. There's only this. This is not, there's never a deficiency. Never. There's never something else to get. Is that clearer, or even more confusing? There was a point about change in angle of vision. That seems to be right. But also, on the other hand, when we're clear enough, I think even being utterly confounded and deluded or whatever, that's it also. It's this, you can't fall out of it. You can't miss it, actually. But it may be possible to say that, but if we don't experience it, it's only once we're experiencing it that may be helpful to hear. Well, perhaps not even then, because we don't need to hear it. But if you see what I mean, it's not like we that's true when it's true. I put it like that. Okay, I'm not sure if I've made things even more confusing or less, hopefully less, and maybe there's some glimmer of something coming through. So, Dan, let's try another.
Is creativity a form of entrancement, a kind of habitual sense of self, an addiction of sorts that needs to drop away?
Well, trouble is the word creativity has got a lot of different meanings, and on the whole, they're mostly pretty positive about us humans being doing what maybe in some ways we do best, which is sort of creativity is wonderful. It means our minds are loose and free, and and tune into something that they're ready to let come through them, or whatever. I mean, however you understand it, but it's flexibility, it's fluidity, it's able to respond creatively in helpful, positive, unexpected ways. All of that's great. Whether somebody might have a driven and somewhat addictive, even sort of compulsive kind of approach to a particular kind of creative act, that's possible. I could relate to that myself. In my earlier life, it's pretty sort of a lot of craving and kind of addictiveness around my writing life. I had that, and of course it wasn't all bad. It made me probably more creative in the medium term than I might otherwise have been. But it also meant that, I mean, I think it's addictive when, isn't it a little bit like workaholism then, that we're using some activity. It's a benefit, it's a positive activity, but if we use it in order to escape psychological issues that it would be better to address, then, and if it means it's to the detriment of other things in our life, for example, relationships and caring for others in ways that we've undertaken to do and find ourselves not doing because we're so driven, then that maybe not be so good. Of course, there are instances where people may have acted like that, but we value the work they produced so much that on balance, we kind of give them the benefit of the doubt, I think. I don't know whether Bach, who wrote just so much and had, I can't remember, quite a lot of kids. could he have been a very good dad, really, by our standards today? It seems unlikely, but because he was, I mean, how did the guy produce so much work? It's just staggering, in all these different fields, orchestral, choral, hundreds of cantatas, and I don't know how many, must be in the thousands of keyboard pieces, and massive sets of multiple keyboard pieces. It's just an insane amount of work he produced, and had whatever 12 or 13 kids or something, and but would we call that workaholism, or addictive creativity or something? He was incredibly creative. I mean, I'd say probably if it's getting sort of addictive, we might be being less creative, even though we're doing a lot of output. Like, I don't know. It's I don't know that there's a one size fits all answer, or that I'm really qualified to speak to it very much. It's interesting though. I like the fact that Zen does have this strong, um, relationship to creativity in the normal sense, like producing poetry, producing artworks of different kinds, making beautiful flower arrangements, stunningly beautiful flower arrangements, and making little miniature moss gardens, and making beautiful things. And that's seems to have been quite deep in the Zen DNA from, well, way back, really, from Tang Dynasty China. But it was probably that they were doing that kind of stuff anyway, calligraphy and landscape painting with ink and that kind of thing. And they were into meditation, and they saw that the meditation could help with the creativity. You sit for a while and then pick up a paintbrush, and you might just do it with you might manage to do stuff that you wouldn't have been able to do without the sitting. Really, if you look at some of these great master calligraphers, it's unbelievable what they could do with a brush stroke. The amount of sort of detail they could conjure out of a little bit of flourishing, different pressure, different angle, different strokes, different movement, different speed. Just one brush and an inkstone, and the water, and they make something. You see all kinds of things in it. How do they do that? That kind of thing coming out of a lot of deep meditation is a wonderful um, thing. And maybe it actually, I think this is kind of related actually to the question, that it seems to speak for the value of stillness, rest, calm, dropping everything before coming into the creative act. We're hearing a lot have been for 50 years in the world of meditation about the nervous system, and the value, and why does this kind of practice help us? Well, it switches on. Back in the 60s, they called it the relaxation response. Nowadays, they call it, it turns on the parasympathetic nervous system, which is about rest and digest. And I wonder whether we in the West, with this heavy work ethic, especially in Northern European countries, Protestant countries, there's the great work on the Protestant work ethic. Was it Jacob Burckhardt? Somebody wrote this massive opus on Protestant work ethic. Can't remember now. But anyway, it's about how, I wonder whether we've been really a little bit shortchanged in our cultures, our Northern European derived cultures, around kindness toward our nervous systems. That there's been a tendency to just value the sympathetic system for activity. The sympathetic system can do, of course, fight and flight, freeze, as we know, but it also just primes us for action of any kind. When we go and have a coffee with a friend, there's some sympathetic nervous system activation. It can also go to parasympathetic, a really nice mellow time lounging around with friends, But whether we in the Western influenced cultures, Western European, Northwestern, especially Western European cultures have favored I don't know, this may be stretching it, but the sympathetic nervous system, and have had demonized rest and digest, parasympathetic system. The devil makes work for idle hands. Well, yeah, there's some truth in that, but maybe there's also some truth that we need rest, and I wonder whether we, just thinking how, like in the days before penicillin, if you could afford it, medicine, its number one cure was rest, if you could afford it. That's why all these spa towns flourished all over Europe. So rest was sanctioned if you were sick. But I mean, if you weren't sick, you had to, the harder you work, the better, kind of in the Puritan Protestant influenced cultures, especially. So maybe we're really jumping at this meditation thing because we're starving for ease, for rest. And we can allow ourselves to do it as long as it's got some sort of seemingly productive output, which meditation, they say, has. So we'll allow ourselves to do it that way, But I don't know. I'm just speculating. Okay, enough of that.
Okay. If you have truly realized oneself, does the urge come up to put the body to use, or does this also shed away? If the urge does come up, where does this urge come from? Even if at the point of being, there possibly might not be such a thing as question. Or, in other words, why does Rosso even face the wall?
There's an amazing line by Master Tozan, who's a 8th, 9th century Chinese master, Dongshan, who wrote this thing called the Five Ranks, which is rather complex and sounds rather abstract work on different kinds of enlightenment. And one of the 5 ranks of enlightenment, so to speak, is really absolutely nothing. And I'm not going to go into the details of the 5 at all here, nor even of that one, but it's nothing in nothing, something like that is one way of looking at it. And he has a verse to it. And one line of the verse is, in nothingness, there is a way. Which is kind of an amazing line if you think about it a little bit, even conceptually, because it means even in nothing at all, there is a way. Doesn't really make sense. But when the experience happens, if it does, so this really everything falling away, amazingly, everything comes forth when it doesn't really make sense. Even in that, it comes forth. Clearly, just nothing, no seeing, no person, no body, no mind, no world, and yet everything emerges, everything appears, and it seems that we whatever we may go through. I mean, what's the point of just this again? It sounds a little bit like this maybe pointed to that pit of emptiness that I brought up in one of the talks, or somewhere along the way. The pit of emptiness, getting too stuck in. I mean, here we are, and what are we going to do? I mean, the great idea of Mahayana Buddhism is get clear, see through it all, and what comes up is compassion, and impulse to do what we can to help in whatever way is appropriate. What's appropriate for us, what's appropriate for the situations we find ourselves in. Sort of step up. That we're not. We may spend a lot of time getting clear. That's okay, I think, but the fruit of it is not really supposed to be removal from the world. At least in Zen, that last oxiding picture is back in the place of commerce, of people, of humanity, back in the midst of it all, not hidden away on some mountaintop. We may need to have been hidden away at times, but that's not the last. That's not where we're heading. Let's say there's further down off the mountain, and I think that would be the body's impelled to do stuff, right? There's a good question about Rosso, and it's one of some comments were made about Rosso that I'm just turning to see if I got them down, and I have not. But was he teaching or was he not teaching? Is a question that some masters debated later, a few hundred years or in the late Sung. So sort of 300, 400, 500 years after Rosso, there was some couple of little debates went on between some masters. Was Rosso teaching? Was he trying to help people or not? So it's an interesting thing to contemplate. We could do another retreat on that, actually. Was Rosso trying to help? It's a really quite a good thing to think about and explore. Okay, Dan, let's try another, please.
Before sitting, to caffeinate or not? That is the question. In the world of Zen, is there a bias towards or away from caffeine? Are there pros and cons, or simply based on the individual?
Oh man, I mean, I suspect that in the world of Zen and Chan, there is a slight bias in favor, because they like their tea. And Bodhidharma, a great ancestor of Zen in China, was credited with bringing tea to China. He's supposed to have cut off his eyelids so he couldn't sleep and threw them on the ground, and where they landed, tea bushes sprouted, which is how tea came to China, supposedly. So that seems to indicate caffeinate, but I don't know. I mean, I think there's if you can, alas, right now I'm not in a phase of life where I don't have any caffeine, but I have at times. And I think it's nicer, really, if you can have natural energy that's not dependent on a hit of coffee or tea. It's very nice, and why would you caffeinate? And maybe you would if you were going to sit through the night, so you need an extra. But if you're sort of well balanced in your energies and I mean, yeah, many people, I have to admit, many people that I know, teachers, practitioners, students, long-term students, tend to take some caffeine on board. It could be a cup of coffee a day, or it could be more. And during retreat, likewise. Probably we might just say anything that helps, that's not harmful. Yeah, I mean, I've heard of people who didn't approve of coffee on retreats. There's a story about Pat Hawk Roshi that some of you have sat with, I think, in the past, and apparently some group of his students thought there shouldn't be coffee on retreats, and they asked him, and he simply replied, "No coffee, no Pat." Shinzen Young has a story actually about being he was invited to lead meditation at a coffee company in Vermont, Green Mountain Coffee Roasters or something like that. And some of his students heard about this and thought this was, really bizarre. Like, why would those caffeine junkies want to meditate or something? But actually, yeah, there's a long tradition of tea in in uh, in Chan Zen practice. I was just wondering actually whether Theravada folks in India and Sri Lanka, do they have tea? I don't know. I'd love to know actually. So I'm sure the Tibetans do, right? With the yak butter tea or whatever. Okay, happy to speculate about a nice cup. This is, by the way, I'm drinking decaf tea because I had a cup of coffee earlier. I had a cup of coffee and a cup of tea earlier in the day, and I try not to have caffeine after noon-ish. And I quite like, but I quite like a black tea, so with a splash of milk. So I get Trader Joe's decaffeinated Irish tea. It's very nice. Okay, should we try another?
Quoting you, sense of self as habitual muscular contraction. Where can I find that quote? Who said it?
Well, I was quoting Alan Watts, and I heard it on this podcast called Below the Line with a guy called James Bashara, and somewhere in there he has a podcast with Alan Watts. I forget when Alan Watts died, but surely it was 40 plus years ago, I think. But what James did was ask a question as if to an interviewee, and that was Alan Watts, and cut and paste together recordings of him so that he seemed to be directly answering the question that's been asked. And in there, it was very enjoyable. It was only 40 minutes long or something. And in there was this point where Alan Watts says, he says that about the self. I wanted to add something actually. It may be true that we experience this habitual muscular contraction and habitual patterns of thought as evidence of self. I don't think it's quite true that they are it, because you could, excuse me, you could actually, you could release that muscular contraction as well as those habits of thought and not see through the self. I suspect that they could both stop, and actually the genie still kind of hovers there. It may have become unsustained by its normal conditionings, but it could still be there. That's my hunch. So it may be more accurate to say they are two elements of experience. That's to say, contraction and patterns of thought that reference I, me, mine. They are two primary, pieces of evidence that our sense of self, habitually checks in with as proof of its existence. But it's it's kind of like a rain in a cloud. The water's evaporated up and made the cloud. But if the water stops evaporating, the cloud can still be there. Something else has to happen for the cloud to be seen through. It's why we can have various kinds of experience of much less sense of self, of a much quieter, like self not really be up in consciousness. Actually, we can get engrossed in activities of many kinds and be not really conscious of self. And sometimes that can be quite strong, and we have a really marvelous feeling of being in the zone, as they call it, as athletes call it, for example. But that's lovely, and much to be wished for, and there's a lot of research around it, and how it correlates with satisfaction with life and happiness generally, to have those kinds of experience on a regular basis. But they're not the same as seeing through the sense of self, so that we actually see suddenly that what we have taken to be myself has never actually been here. That's the thing, is to discover. And I don't know whether it can be gradual. Probably it can, but I can't imagine, because it's such a surprise to suddenly see that this thing that is so obvious, I'm me, and have always been, to see that ding 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 ding, well, habit has just been a habit. It's just only been a habit. It's not actually referencing a real thing at all. And to suddenly see that the real thing we thought it was referencing has never been there. That's it's it's a blessing. It's a blessing. Yeah. Okay. Dan, are there any more?
Yeah, quite a number. We have a growing list.
Oh man. Okay. Well, hold on. Wait. Before we go on, I want to just reflect a moment on the plan, because here's what I was sort of hoping this might look like: is that sort of sometime around about now-ish, we might stop the Q&A, have a little sit, like maybe 20 minutes or something, and then have some time when, if anybody wants to actually share, with speech, just some short little something about the retreat, or possibly even to ask a question, we could do it by having the raise hand function, where you, let me just look at my screen. I think you'll find at the bottom of your screen towards the right, there's a thing called reactions. And if you click on that, you get a little panel. And in the panel at the bottom, there's one called raise hand. Does everybody have that, by the way?
Henry, can I make a suggestion?
Sure thing.
What I'm thinking about doing is unmuting, so that people may unmute themselves, and then I'll call on each person who has raised a hand. But
Okay.
the easiest way to do that, since there are multiple screens, even if I open it up as wide as I can't see everyone who's raised a hand. So if you just say question maybe in the chat box, and then I'll call on the people, whoever chats in first, in whatever order you come in, I'll call your name, then
Yeah, but
unmute yourself.
hey, Dan, one little thing. I think that when you raise a hand, you get put on the first screen at the top. Could somebody just try it, actually? Would somebody mind just doing the raise a hand? Yeah, like, okay, you see there's Christopher Ogden and
Okay.
Lisa. You got them right on the first screen?
Yep.
Okay. So I think that should... Do you guys all actually want to say something, you four who've raised a hand? Or are you just doing it kindly out of sort of, I mean, like, just because I just asked if somebody would? Or did you actually want to say something?
Deborah, try unmuting yourself.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Just to hear if Deborah did. But don't say it now, because we've got to make a plan of action. Okay. It seems like Deborah did. Maybe Lisa did. But look, why don't we do this? If we've got... Dan, how many more questions have we actually got in the chat? Approximately.
Looks like 18 or 19
questions.
Well, looks like it, but maybe some of them are just statements.
Okay. Um, okay, so so we're not going to do all of them. Could you save them before we end,
Yeah,
and then maybe I'll see if I could um, pick them up at the next retreat, or I could maybe write a newsletter response to some of them, maybe, or something like that.
I'll
Or
just
maybe,
email them to you.
yeah, perfect. And then maybe those folks, if you're not, if you're in the swing of things at Mountain Cloud, you could bring them up in Dokusan with either myself or Valerie. Or if you're not yet in that swing or whatever, you could also just sign up for a session. If you want it to be with me, you could do it with me. If you want with Valerie, you could do it with Valerie and bring it to that session, whatever that question is. Just as a rule of thumb, if anybody's got a sort of long comment they want to go over with me personally, it's sort of better to do it in a session, really, I think. And what we're doing at the moment is my wife Claire and I are trying to set up this thing called Calendly, which is a really easy sign up system for sessions. But it's not that easy to set it up, but it's really easy for the user once we've got it set up. So we're trying to get it set up so that people can sign up for hour, half hour, or quarter hour sessions, and that would be sort of outside of ordinary Dokusan for people who want slightly longer. And and then I'm going to be starting up Dokusan again before too long, and I'm still trying to work out how to do it exactly. But it will be coming back on. So maybe some of these questions could be held for either of those circumstances, either like a session or a Dokusan. And what I'm going to suggest now is we'll just do two more questions, and then we'll have a short sit, a short break, no, a little break and a short sit, and then we'll have a sort of final bit with people sharing with that raise hand business we were talking about. And just keep it, when we get to that, it'll have to be kind of brief, I think, just, kind of 15, 20 per. It's good to hear other voices. So Dan, let's do a couple more questions now and then have a little break.
Zen teachings speak about koans as barriers, and you have spoken beautifully about koans pointing to our hearts like spears opening us once the sense of a separate self dissolves. Would you speak more about how these descriptions of koans compare? They seem to be about finally seeing through constructs we've mistaken as reality, true nature. What dissolves the constructs, the koan or that which is facing the wall?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say what dissolves the constructs is reality. Reality in which there are no constructs. Reality which, so to speak, knows that constructs are only constructs. They're not reality. See, the problem is that we take constructs to be reality. We lend many, many, many presuppositions and assumptions our credence to a greater extent than they merit. That's the problem. There's actually, again, like with thoughts, there's nothing really wrong with the constructs themselves. Many of them are useful, but they are merely constructs. And we might sign on for that sort of philosophically. Whatever construct means, it could probably be parsed out in different ways. But when we really get it, these things have not actually been real the way I thought. And it is possible for that sense of the reality that I've ascribed to them to vanish. It's possible to see that they weren't real the way I thought, and often in that moment they actually vanish. But at least we see that they're not real the way I thought. It's very, very liberating. And yes, I think koans are kind of expressions from that liberated state kind of thing, from that reality of basically a sort of unfettered liberation, a sort of, yeah, well, having dissed the word boundless, I'm trying not to use it, but basically boundless, unobstructed, unfettered, entirely unfettered freedom, wide open. Empty is a right word. Empty, boundless. It's incredible. But from that, all these koans sort of come, and they come using ordinary stuff, words and things and people and animals and trees and rivers and mountains. And they come using all the stuff of this world because that's what that empty, boundless freedom thing does. It doesn't actually exist itself as a sort of ontological reality. It's not actually, emptiness is real, but it's not a thing like all the other things. And so it's not a thing that you can sort of, get. It's a dropping of things, and it's a dropping of self. And, it's unmistakable. But what does it look like? It looks like this. And what does it sound like? Like these words, or like this. The famous koan. What is the sound of one hand? There's a koan about farting. The student asked the master, "Master, if all sounds are the voice of the Buddha, what are you doing making farting sounds?" or something like that. And he gets slightly scolded actually by the teacher. He doesn't like him being so rude. It's not necessary to be rude. There's nothing more enlightened about being rude than polite, actually. Okay, wait a minute. How did I get onto that? Dan, I've totally forgotten the thread. What was the question? Or maybe I finished answering it.
It was about, constructs of reality, true nature. What dissolves the constructs facing the wall? Or
yeah. Well, I mean, in our Zen way, what dissolves the credence given to the constructs is reality itself. Yeah, I'd say the same thing. Yeah. I mean, and the way we sort of, the method for allowing it to do that, is our sitting, and sometimes adding a koan to our sitting. Yes, 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 it can work. It can really work. Okay, well, maybe we'll, I think we better stop now, actually. I know I said 2 questions. Let's just leave it there. And I'm really sorry about not responding to whatever it is, 1.5 dozen questions. Please, I'll get to see them, because Dan, thank you, is going to email it to me, and I'll see what I can do. But also consider what I was saying about ways to, bring them to a meeting if you want. Okay, let's pause it there. Have like a 5-minute break and then a 10-minute sit or something. Does that sound okay, Dan?
Sounds great. So
okay.
We'll be back about 10 after.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and then we'll have maybe we'll just have like a 10-minute sit max, actually. Maybe a 5-minute sit. So we've got 10 minutes to share. Okay. Thank you very much.